The billionaire's dog unmasked a fake maid and revealed her true past. What would you do if one lie was the only way to protect your family's name? Stay with this story until the end, and you will understand why one woman's secret could change a billionaire's heart forever. Now, let us return to our main character. Rain drummed against the iron gates of Ashcroft Manor, steady and cold. A young woman stood outside, clutching a frayed canvas bag to her chest as the night wind whipped her hair across her face. Her uniform, borrowed from a cleaning agency, clung to her in damp folds. Her name was Florencia Paredes, and every drop of rain felt like a question she could not yet answer. She took a breath that tasted like metal and fear. The lights of the mansion glowed through the mist, tall windows lined in gold. Somewhere behind those walls was the file her father had once spoken about, the file that could prove he had not been the criminal people said he was. The intercom buzzed, startling her. "Name?" a voice asked. "Florencia," she answered softly. "Temporary maid. From the agency." The gate slid open with a slow groan, as if even the house itself was suspicious. Inside, the marble floor gleamed under chandelier light. A tall man stood near the staircase, his dark hair slightly unkempt, a white shirt rolled at the sleeves. His eyes were sharp, assessing. Quentin Ashcroft, the billionaire who owned half of London's skyline and the man whose company had ruined her father's life. "I do not remember asking for new staff," he said. His voice was calm but carried the weight of authority. Florencia lowered her gaze. "The agency sent me after the last maid left unexpectedly, sir. Just for the night shift." "Lont." Before he could respond, a golden retriever trotted down the stairs, tail wagging once before stopping. The dog sniffed the air, then growled softly. "Duke, enough," Quentin warned, his tone softening. But Duke's nose twitched toward Florencia's bag, where something faintly smelled of old paper and dust. Florencia took a cautious step back, her heart beating faster. If Duke pulled the bag open, he would find the photograph a worn wedding picture of her parents, one that tied her to a past she could not afford to reveal. Quentin's gaze followed the dog's movement. "He usually likes people," he said quietly. "You make him nervous." "I suppose some animals sense fear," Florencia replied, forcing a polite smile. "I have had a long night." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "The staff quarters are down the left corridor. Mrs. Holloway will show you your duties. Keep the West Wing off limits. Understood?" "Yes, sir." Her voice trembled slightly. As she followed the head housekeeper through the hallway, her shoes squeaked softly on the polished floor. Every painting on the wall seemed to watch her pass faces of Ashcrofts from centuries past, all carrying the same cold pride. When she reached the small servant's room, she finally exhaled. Her hands shook as she unzipped the canvas bag and pulled out the faded photograph. In the picture, her father stood in his old military uniform beside her mother, smiling. Behind them, a familiar building rose in the distance, the same bridge where the Ashcroft factory explosion had happened 15 years ago. Florencia traced her father's face with her thumb. "I will find it, Papa," she whispered. "I will clear your name." Outside, thunder rolled again. In another part of the mansion, Duke lay by Quentin's feet, restless, as if the scent of truth still lingered in the air. And somewhere deep inside Ashcroft Manor, a hidden file waited buried under dust, ready to rewrite both of their lives. Before we continue, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and it is the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let us continue the story. The morning light crept through the tall windows of Ashcroft Manor, painting thin gold lines across the marble floor. The rain had stopped, leaving the air cold and heavy with the smell of wet earth. In the kitchen, Florencia tied her apron and began washing the silver trays from last night's dinner. Her fingers moved with quiet focus, but her mind was elsewhere. Every clock tick in that house reminded her of time running out. She had only 3 weeks on the agency's schedule before they replaced her. That was all she had to find the file that could clear her father's name. "Miss Paredes?" The voice startled her. It was Mrs. Holloway, the head housekeeper, a woman whose tone was as sharp as her posture. "Mr. Ashcroft wants the library cleaned before noon. And please, do not disturb anything in the glass cabinets. He dislikes anyone touching the old photographs." "Yes, ma'am," Florencia said softly. When Mrs. Holloway left, Florencia wiped her hands and walked through the corridor toward the library. The door opened with a low creak. Inside, the air smelled of leather and cedar. Sunlight filtered through half-closed blinds, falling on shelves stacked with books, portraits, and a grand piano covered in dust. She began to work carefully, dusting each surface, until her eyes caught something in a silver frame, a picture of a young boy with his arm in a cast, smiling beside a soldier whose face was mostly shadowed by light. Her breath caught. That soldier's stance, that uniform, it was familiar. Too familiar. Florencia leaned closer, her heart thudding. Her father had once told her about saving a boy from a burning car near the docks 15 years ago. The details, the uniform, even the background, they matched. A quiet voice startled her. "You stopped cleaning," Quentin said from the doorway. Florencia turned quickly, clutching the rag to her chest. "I am sorry, sir. This picture caught my attention." He stepped closer, his expression unreadable. "That was taken a long time ago. I was 10. My father said the man in the photo disappeared soon after the accident." She swallowed hard. "He looks like someone I once knew. A soldier." Quentin studied her face. "Do you come from a military family?" Her throat tightened. "Something like that." For a brief moment, silence hung between them, heavy but not hostile. Duke trotted into the room, sniffed the air, then sat beside her feet, his tail thumping once. Quentin glanced at the dog. "That is unusual. He rarely likes strangers." Florencia smiled faintly. "Maybe he senses that I mean no harm." He nodded, almost approvingly. "Perhaps." Then he walked to the piano, tapping the lid absent-mindedly. "You have a steady hand. Keep that up. This house could use more people who care about detail." "Thank you, sir." When he left, Florencia let out the breath she had been holding. She turned back to the photo, whispering to herself, "So it was him Papa saved you." That night, after her shift, she returned to her small room under the stairs. She took out the worn photograph of her parents again, the edges now beginning to curl. Her father's handwriting on the back read, "For truth, no matter how long it hides." Her eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. "I will find it," she whispered. "I will show the world who you really were." Outside her door, Duke lay quietly, his head resting on his paws, as if keeping watch. Down the hallway, Quentin paused, looking toward the dim light under her door. For reasons he could not explain, he found himself wondering who this quiet maid really was, and why his dog seemed to guard her as if she belonged there. The mansion slept, but secrets never did. And in that silence, two destinies began to turn toward each other, one lie away from the truth. The next evening arrived quietly, carrying the faint chill of autumn. The scent of pine from the surrounding woods mixed with the distant hum of the city beyond the gates. Inside Ashcroft Manor, the lights glowed low and warm. Florencia was finishing her duties in the west corridor, polishing the brass handles of the tall doors that lined the hallway. Every time her cloth touched the cold metal, she thought of the secret locked behind one of those doors, the file her father once mentioned in his trembling voice. She had spent the past night studying the layout of the house. The west wing was restricted, guarded by a keypad and a lock she had no access to. But she had noticed that Quentin's study, where he kept his private safe, was connected to the library through a narrow passage behind a curtain. That was where the file could be. When the clock struck 10, the other maids retired to their rooms. The house fell into silence except for the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the foyer. Florencia waited. Then she slipped out of her quarters, her footsteps silent against the carpet. She moved through the corridor, the light of her small lantern casting golden circles on the walls. Duke appeared from the shadows, tail wagging once, then stopping. "You again," she whispered. The dog tilted his head, eyes calm and curious. "All right," she murmured, "but do not bark. We will both be in trouble." She reached the library door. Her hand trembled as she turned the handle. It opened with a faint click. The room smelled of old paper and wax. She crossed to the far corner where a curtain hung slightly crooked. Behind it, a panel of dark wood showed a thin crack of light, the secret passage. Before she could move, a soft voice startled her. "Could not sleep." Florencia froze. Quentin stood in the doorway, his shirt sleeves rolled, his tie loosened. He looked more tired than angry, but his eyes carried the quiet sharpness of a man used to control. "I was just making sure everything was locked," she said quickly. He walked closer, his steps slow. "At this hour?" Florencia's throat tightened. Duke trotted between them, wagging his tail, unaware of the tension. Quentin sighed and crouched to pat him. "You like her, do you?" he said softly to the dog. "You have good instincts." Then his gaze lifted back to Florencia. "Tell me something. Why does a woman who scrubs floors look like she has read every book in this room?" She swallowed. "Because I have had time to read, sir. When one grows up with little, books are free windows." A faint smile touched his lips. "That is an answer I do not hear often." He straightened, his expression softening slightly. "There is tea in the kitchen if you need warmth. You should rest." "I will, sir," she said, keeping her voice steady. When he left, she exhaled deeply, her heart racing. The curtain still swayed gently where the draft escaped. She whispered, "Not tonight, too close." "Come-o." She left the library quietly, returning to her small room. But sleep did not come easily. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed, the lantern flickering beside her, and pulled the wedding photograph from her bag once again. The corners were bent, the image fading, but the faces still glowed with the quiet love of her parents. "I almost got caught," she said softly, her voice breaking. "But I will not stop, not until your name is cleared." 1. Outside, Duke lay near her door again, a silent guardian. Down the hall, Quentin stood by his window, watching the moonlight reflect on the wet stones of the driveway. Something about the new maid unsettled him, her quiet strength, her eyes that carried too much pain for someone her age, the way Duke had chosen her without hesitation. He did not know that the same photograph Duke had sniffed earlier now lay hidden under the maid's pillow. Nor could he guess that inside the locked west wing of his mansion waited the proof that would connect their pasts forever. The house was still, the air cold and heavy with unspoken truth. And though both tried to sleep, neither knew that the next morning would bring the moment when deception and destiny would finally collide. The next morning arrived with sunlight spilling gently across the marble floor, painting the grand foyer in pale gold. For the first time since she had arrived, Florencia felt warmth inside Ashcroft Manor. She stood in the kitchen preparing breakfast, the scent of coffee drifting through the air. Duke rested nearby, his head on his paws, watching her with patient curiosity. Mrs. Holloway entered with her usual brisk steps. "Mr. Ashcroft has a meeting until noon," she announced. "He wants the conservatory cleaned and the library dusted again before lunch." "Yes, ma'am," Florencia replied. She kept her voice calm, hiding the flicker of hope that crossed her mind. The library again, another chance. After the housekeeper left, she packed her cleaning supplies and made her way down the corridor. The library looked brighter in the morning light, the smell of lemon polish and aged wood filling the air. She began to dust the high shelves, glancing occasionally at the curtain hiding the secret panel. Her heart beat faster, remembering how close she had come the night before. As she climbed the small ladder to reach the upper shelves, Duke padded in, tail wagging softly. "Not again," she whispered with a smile. "You are going to get me in trouble." But Duke simply sat down and watched, head tilted. She laughed quietly. "Fine, stay, but do not bark." Half an hour passed before she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to see Quentin standing by the doorway, his tie loosened, a folder in hand. "You start early," he said, his tone lighter than usual. "It is easier to work when the house is quiet," she replied, climbing down from the ladder. He looked around, his eyes softening at the sight of Duke sitting peacefully near her. "That dog follows no one, yet somehow you have him wrapped around your finger." Florencia smiled faintly. "Animals sense kindness. They know who needs comfort." Quentin nodded, thoughtful. "Perhaps you are right. Most people in this house care only about appearances. It is refreshing to meet someone who still believes in simple things." There was a pause, gentle but charged. He noticed the sunlight touching her hair, the steadiness in her gaze. For a moment, he forgot why she was there at all. "Tell me," he said quietly, "why did you take this job? You seem educated." She hesitated. "Life does not always give us choices, sir. Sometimes work is work." He smiled, though the expression carried sadness. "I understand that more than you think." "So?" Before she could answer, Mrs. Holloway appeared at the door. "Mr. Ashcroft, the board is waiting for you." "Thank you," he said, straightening. He turned to Florencia. "Keep up the good work." When they left, Florencia leaned against the ladder, her pulse still quickened. She could feel the walls of her secret closing in, the line between truth and pretense blurring more each day. She returned to polishing the shelves when Duke suddenly stood, ears perked. He trotted toward the curtain and barked once. Florencia froze. "No," she whispered, but Duke pushed his nose under the fabric, revealing the edge of the hidden panel. Before she could stop him, a framed photo on a nearby table wobbled and fell to the floor, the glass cracking. Florencia crouched to pick it up. Inside the broken frame, beneath the picture, she saw something, an envelope marked with an old seal, its edge yellowed with age. The initials FP were faintly visible on the corner. Her breath caught. Her father's initials. She slid the envelope into her apron pocket just as Mrs. Holloway's voice echoed from the hallway. "Florencia, are you in there?" "Yes, ma'am." She called back quickly, heart pounding, almost done. When the house quieted again, she unfolded the envelope in her room. Inside was a letter dated 15 years earlier, signed by her father. It spoke of the explosion, of evidence that had been hidden to protect the Ashcroft family's reputation. It was proof. Tears filled her eyes, blurring the ink. "You were right, Papa," she whispered. "You were telling the truth." At that same moment, in his office across the city, Quentin looked out his window, unaware that the woman sweeping dust from his shelves had just uncovered the truth that would unravel his family's legacy. And for the first time in years, destiny began to stir inside the quiet halls of Ashcroft Manor. That night, the rain returned. It tapped softly against the tall windows of Ashcroft Manor like a secret trying to be heard. Florencia sat on the edge of her narrow bed, the letter spread open under the small lamp. The paper was fragile, but the truth written on it was strong enough to shake everything she thought she knew. Her father had saved a child from the explosion at the Ashcroft docks 15 years ago. That child had been Quentin. But the family had buried the report, shifting the blame to the man who had risked his life. Florencia's chest tightened as she read the final line again. "If you ever find this, my daughter, tell the world that good men should never be forgotten." Tears slipped silently down her cheeks. She pressed the letter to her heart and whispered, "I found it, Papa, but how do I tell him?" The sound of footsteps in the hall startled her. She quickly folded the letter and hid it under the pillow. The door creaked open, and Duke pushed his head through first, his tail wagging gently. "Duke," she sighed in relief, reaching down to scratch behind his ear. "You should be asleep." Then Quentin appeared in the doorway. He was not in a suit this time, only a gray sweater and dark pants. The harshness usually in his eyes was gone. "Sorry," he said quietly. "Duke kept scratching at your door. I thought something was wrong." Florencia tried to steady her breathing. "I was just finishing my chores, sir." He nodded, glancing around the small, plain room. "This place is colder than I remember. I will have the housekeeper send a heater." "That is not necessary," she said quickly. He smiled faintly. "You always say that." Then he hesitated, leaning against the doorframe. "May I ask you something, Florencia?" She met his eyes, unsure what to say. "Of course. Do you ever feel like your life was decided by someone else's choices?" He skipped. "Every day." He gave a quiet laugh, but it carried no joy. "When I was 10, there was an accident. My father said we lost good men that day. But I remember a hand pulling me out of the fire, a voice telling me to hold on. I never knew who it was." Florencia's throat tightened. The truth burned behind her ribs, begging to be spoken. But fear silenced her. "Sometimes memories fade for a reason," she said softly. He nodded, thoughtful. "Maybe so." He turned to leave, then stopped. "You have brought something different to this house. It has not felt alive in years." When he was gone, Florencia sank back onto the bed, shaking. Duke nudged her hand, as if sensing her turmoil. "What should I do?" she whispered. "If he learns who I am, he will think I lied to hurt him." She stared at the folded letter, torn between duty and the fragile bond that had begun to grow between them. The next morning sunlight returned, bright and cold. Florencia worked in the conservatory, trimming the overgrown plants when Quentin entered, holding a cup of coffee. Duke followed at his side. "You work too hard," he said lightly. "When was the last time you took a break?" "I prefer keeping busy," she replied, hiding her nervousness behind a polite smile. He looked at her for a long moment. "You remind me of someone. A woman who once believed in fixing what was broken." Florencia set down the shears, her hands trembling slightly. "And did she succeed?" Quentin smiled faintly. "I think she did, though she never lived to see it." The room fell quiet except for the rustle of leaves. Duke lay down between them, resting his head on his paws. In that silence, something unspoken passed between them, an understanding that neither could explain. For the first time, Florencia saw the man beyond the wealth, the boy who had once been saved. And Quentin saw not a maid, but a woman whose kindness carried the weight of truth. As she turned away to hide the tears threatening to fall, she whispered to herself, "Not yet." He cannot know yet. But outside, the wind carried the faint scent of rain again, a reminder that secrets never stay buried forever. The morning came with a clear sky, bright and sharp after the long rain. Sunlight spilled through the high windows of Ashcroft Manor, filling the halls with a warmth that almost felt human. But peace never lasted long in houses built on secrets. Florencia was dusting the grand staircase when Mrs. Holloway entered the foyer, her voice brisk and impatient. "Mr. Ashcroft will be hosting an evening meeting with several partners tonight. I expect everything to be spotless. That includes the drawing room and the library." The mention of the library made Florencia's hands pause midair. "Yes, ma'am," she replied softly. When the housekeeper left, Florencia looked toward the heavy wooden door that led to the library. Behind that door was the passage she had discovered, and the safe she had not yet dared to open. She had proof now, the letter from her father, but the full report could be inside that safe. The file that could clear his name once and for all. By late afternoon, the manor buzzed with quiet activity. The staff hurried about setting tables, polishing silver, and arranging flowers. Quentin oversaw everything with his usual composure, but his eyes lingered more than once on the young maid with the calm, determined face. When evening came, the meeting began. The dining room doors closed, muffling the sound of conversation and laughter. Florencia moved silently through the back hallway, Duke padding beside her. She whispered, "All right, boy, one last time." She entered the library, heart hammering. The glow from her lantern flickered across the shelves. The curtain hid the narrow wooden panel she had found weeks ago. She pushed it aside. Behind it stood a small safe, dark and still. Her hands trembled as she tried the handle. It was locked, of course. But then she noticed a tiny brass key hanging from a hook above the fireplace, likely forgotten by someone years ago. She reached for it, but Duke barked once, low and sharp. "Quiet," she whispered. "Please, Duke." The dog growled softly and moved toward the door, his ears twitching. She turned and froze. Quentin stood in the doorway. The light from the hall framed him in gold and shadow. He looked not angry but betrayed. His eyes fell to the open panel, then to the small key in her hand. "I knew you were hiding something," he said quietly. "But I did not think it would be this." Florencia's voice barely rose above a whisper. "Please, let me explain." He took a step closer, his jaw tightening. "You lied about who you are. You searched my home. Tell me why, before I call security." Tears filled her eyes. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out the worn letter. "Because this is the truth you never wanted to see." He hesitated. She unfolded the letter and held it out to him. "My father was not a thief or a saboteur. He saved your life, Quentin. He pulled you from the fire the day your family's factory exploded. And for that, he was blamed and destroyed." "Ballin'?" Quentin took the letter with shaking hands, his eyes scanning the faded words. The silence in the room grew heavy. "I did not know," he said at last, his voice cracking. "I was a child. My father handled the investigation. He told me the man responsible had fled." Florencia's tears fell freely now. "He did not flee. He spent the rest of his life trying to prove his innocence while your company erased his name." For a long moment, neither spoke. Duke whined softly, the only sound breaking the tension. Finally, Quentin whispered, "You came here to expose me." She shook her head. "I came here to remind you of the truth. Whether you believe me or not is up to you." He stepped back, his face pale. "I need time," he said quietly, before turning and walking away. Florencia stood alone, the letter still trembling in her hands. Duke pressed against her leg, as if to comfort her. She sank to the floor, whispering, "It is over. You." But as the echo of Quentin's footsteps faded, she knew it was not. The truth was out now, and once spoken, it could not be buried again. Outside, the sky began to darken, clouds forming again on the horizon. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the weight of what had finally been revealed. The next morning was heavy and gray. The storm that had gathered through the night broke just before dawn, washing the gardens clean but leaving the air thick with silence. Florencia stood at the window of her small room, watching the raindrops crawl down the glass. Her uniform hung damp on the chair. Her eyes were red, not from lack of sleep, but from everything she had said the night before. She had told Quentin the truth. She had shown him the letter. And now she was certain she would be dismissed. A knock came at the door. Mrs. Holloway stood there, her face tight and unreadable. "Mr. Ashcroft wishes to see you in his office," she said curtly. "Pack your things afterward." Florencia nodded, her heart sinking. She followed the housekeeper through the quiet hallways. Every step echoed like a final goodbye. Quentin's office looked colder in the morning light. The large windows framed a sky still bruised from the storm. He stood by his desk, the letter lying open beside a half-finished cup of coffee. Duke rested near his feet, tail unmoving. When Florencia entered, Quentin looked up. His eyes were shadowed but calm. "You have caused quite a stir," he said softly. "I am sorry," she whispered. "That was never my intention." He studied her for a moment, then gestured toward the chair opposite him. "Sit." She obeyed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I read your father's letter," he said. "I also looked through the company archives last night. The original investigation report was hidden. The man who took the blame, your father, was innocent. My father's lawyers destroyed the evidence." "Well," her throat tightened. "Then you believe me?" Quentin nodded slowly. "I do now." He took a deep breath. "But believing you does not erase what my family did. I do not expect forgiveness." Tears welled in her eyes. "I did not come here for revenge, Quentin. I only wanted the truth to live somewhere outside that old file." He leaned back, his voice low. "You risked everything to bring it here. I cannot ignore that." "Talm." Duke suddenly stood, crossing the space between them to rest his head against Florencia's knee. Quentin watched the small gesture, a faint, sorrowful smile crossing his face. "Even he knows you do not belong among lies," he said. "But I cannot ask you to stay after this." Florencia rose slowly. "I understand." She turned to leave, her hand already on the doorknob, when he said quietly, "I am not sending you away as punishment. I am sending you away to protect you. When the truth becomes public, there will be backlash. People in my circle will not forgive easily." She looked back at him, her tears falling freely now. "Then let them hate me for honesty." He nodded once, his voice almost a whisper. "That is what I once admired in my father's rescuer." As she stepped into the hallway, Duke whined softly, refusing to move from the door. Quentin sank into his chair, his gaze falling again on the faded letter. For the first time in his life, he felt what his fortune had truly cost, and what he might still lose if he did nothing. The storm outside began to fade, but inside the manor, another kind of reckoning had only just begun. 2 days passed. The rain had stopped, but the air around Ashcroft Manor still carried the stillness of something unfinished. Florencia had moved out quietly, leaving her uniform folded on the bed and a short note for Mrs. Holloway. She rented a small room above a bakery in the lower part of the city, where no one knew her name. Each morning she walked to the hospital to visit her father. His memory was fading, but that day, when she held his hand and whispered, "I found the truth," a faint smile crossed his worn face. "Then it was worth it," he murmured. "Do not let them bury it again." Those words echoed in her mind as she left the hospital and stepped into the weak sunlight. She did not know that, at that very hour, Quentin Ashcroft was standing in front of a boardroom full of his shareholders, holding up the same letter she had shown him. 15 years ago, Quentin began, his voice steady though his hands trembled slightly. This company allowed a man named Florencia Paredes to take the blame for a disaster he did not cause. That man was a hero. "He saved my life." Gasps filled the room. Cameras clicked. His legal counsel shifted uncomfortably, whispering warnings. But Quentin continued. "We built an empire on silence," he said. "Today, I am breaking that silence. Effective immediately, we are creating the Paredes Foundation, a trust for the families of injured workers, and a fund to restore the honor of those wronged by this company's past." The news spread faster than he expected. Headlines carried his words, and within hours, social media filled with praise and disbelief. Some called him reckless, others brave. But Quentin did not care. For the first time in years, he felt light. That evening he drove through the quiet city streets until he reached the bakery with the small light in the upstairs window. He climbed the narrow stairs and knocked softly. When Florencia opened the door, she froze. He stood there, raincoat unbuttoned, a tired smile on his face. "You should not be here," she said, her voice trembling. "I had to be," he replied. "I went public with the truth today. Your father's name has been cleared. The company will carry his legacy." Her eyes widened. "You really did it?" He nodded. "It was the least I could do." He handed her a folded document, the official declaration of the foundation, stamped and signed. At the bottom, her name appeared beside his. She stared at it, speechless. "You want me to help run this?" "I do not want anyone else," he said. "You have more integrity than anyone I have ever met. The world needs that." For a moment she could not speak. The silence between them was full of everything they had endured: pain, guilt, forgiveness, and something fragile that neither dared to name. Finally she whispered, "My father would have been proud." Quentin looked at her, his expression soft. "So am I." Duke barked from the hallway, tail wagging wildly, as if sealing the moment. For the first time in years, Florencia smiled without fear. The truth had finally found its voice, and with it, a new beginning neither of them had expected. A year passed, and the seasons softened the edges of everything that had once felt broken. The name Paredes Foundation had become known across the city. Its programs helped families, veterans, and workers who had lost everything to corporate negligence. Every brochure, every banner, carried the words that had started it all: truth, compassion, renewal. That afternoon, sunlight poured through the glass walls of the Foundation's new community center. Children ran across the garden outside, volunteers arranged boxes of food, and laughter echoed through the open courtyard. Florencia stood near the entrance, her hair pulled back neatly, her eyes calm but bright. She wore no uniform now. Instead, she wore confidence, the quiet strength of a woman who had rebuilt her name. Behind her, a familiar bark turned her around. Duke came bounding through the doorway, tail wagging. "Duke!" she laughed, kneeling to greet him. The dog licked her hand before turning to look over his shoulder. Quentin followed, carrying a bouquet of white lilies. "You are late," she teased softly. "I had to stop at the florist," he replied. "They said lilies mean honor. I thought they belonged here." He handed her the bouquet, and for a moment, they both looked around the building that had risen from years of silence and guilt. Photos of workers and their families decorated the walls, real lives touched by their efforts. "Hard to believe this was once a dream," Florencia said. "Sometimes I still think my father will walk through that door and tell me it is time to go home." Quentin smiled gently. "In a way, he already has. Everything here carries his courage." She looked at him, emotion rising in her chest. "You kept your promise." He shook his head. "We kept it." "Gomentou?" At that moment, a small crowd began to gather near the stage in the courtyard. The event to celebrate the Foundation's one-year anniversary was about to begin. Quentin offered his arm. "Shall we?" They stepped outside together, Duke trotting ahead like the proud guardian he had always been. Cameras flashed, and reporters called out questions, but neither of them seemed to notice. They stood side by side before the crowd, the sunlight glinting off the plaque that read, "In memory of Florencia Paredes, whose truth lit the way." When it was time to speak, Florencia took the microphone. Her voice was steady, warm, carrying across the open space. "This foundation began with pain," she said. "But pain can be a teacher. My father once told me that good men should never be forgotten. Today, we prove that truth does not fade when it is shared with love." Applause filled the air. Quentin stepped forward, placing his hand over hers. "And love," he added, "is the truest kind of justice." The crowd cheered. Duke barked once, his tail wagging like a golden banner. As the music rose and the sky turned a brilliant shade of gold, Florencia looked up at the plaque one last time. The photo of her parents rested beneath it, framed in glass beside a new picture, one of her and Quentin with Duke between them. Some truths hurt, but the right ones heal. And sometimes, healing